call, please indicate your current location, and during the meeting, please remain on camera just as you would be visible during in-person meetings, and please mute when not speaking. Public comment will be via telephone only tonight. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call one of the following two toll-free numbers: 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099 and enter the meeting ID 956. That's 956-8718-7876 on your phone. This information will also be available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website, on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN Channel 16, AT&T Channel 99, and online at a2gov.org/watchctn. Joe, would you please read the land acknowledgement?
Yep. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including Odawa, Ojibwe, Mbode-Wadmi, and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained, generally in unconscionable ways, from indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Great, and it looks like we're ready to move into the roll call. So please go ahead and take the roll. Thanks.
Bet. Commissioner Berkowitz.
Present from Ann Arbor.
Councilmember Briggs.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Colvin Garcia.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Hans. I'm not seeing. Vice Chair Harp.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Levin.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Okay, there you go. Chair McKenna.
Here.
Commissioner Mirsky.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Overbeck.
Here in Ann Arbor.
And I've heard from Councilmember Dino said he's most likely not going to be able to make it. Commissioner Sindra is maybe. He's actually heading to compete at the National Championship Rowing Regatta, so he might be able to join if internet connection allows. And then Commissioner Smith was unable to make it. And then Commissioner Zittelman.
Here in Ann Arbor.
All right. Chair, we got a quorum.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll move to approval of the agenda. So is there a motion to approve the agenda as posted tonight? Vice Chair Hart, thanks. In a second. I guess Colvin Garcia, thank you. Commissioners, please raise your hand if you want to propose any changes or discussion issues on the agenda. Okay, seeing no changes and no hands raised there, all those in favor of approving the agenda as posted, please raise your hand and say aye. Okay, seeing a unanimous vote, great. Seeing a unanimous vote, the agenda is approved. And approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as posted? Thanks, Councilmember Briggs. And a second, I think I saw Vice Chair Harp. Thanks. So, Commissioner, please raise your hand and say aye if you want to propose any changes tonight. Okay, no changes to the meeting minutes. So go ahead and raise your hand and say aye if you would like to approve the minutes as posted.
Aye.
Great. I'm seeing unanimous yes, and so the meeting minutes are approved. Okay, next we'll move to the first opportunity for public comment. This is an opportunity for people who call in to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you're watching on CTN, I won't bungle the numbers this time. Please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 with the meeting ID number 956-8718-7876. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. To electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9. This is a crucial point, you will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak, and when speaking, please move to a quiet area, mute any background sounds, and please state your name and address as you begin your comments. Joe, do we have anyone on the line?
We do. Color ending in 134.
Thank you, Mr. Lang and Chair McKenna. Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. To review the basics, buildings are 65% of the city's Scope 1 and 2 emissions. We'll need to retrofit our vast existing building stock for electric heat pumps so that when we have a clean grid, they'll be emission-free. Adding new gas-burning buildings to that inventory is insanity. Each time we do this, we lock in new CO2 and upstream methane emissions for many decades. That CO2 remains in the atmosphere for 300 years or more, so each new gas-burning building approval is a decision that will affect the next 20 generations, heating their planet. It's tragic because we know how to electrify buildings efficiently and economically. Some developers are doing that here now, but many insist on gas because they're used to it, the kind of mental inertia that's wrecking the planet. Not just developers, of course, it's all of us. I thank Energy Commission and especially the Electrification Working Group for your work on this and for looking at solutions outside of the city administrators. Those are mostly one-sided in their willingness to reward developers for doing what they should be doing anyway, at the expense of the public, handing over our tax dollars or cutting us out of plan review, and exempting commercial kitchens and backup gas generators, another bad idea. Are other cities taking this approach? They may be, but I'm not aware of it. On the other hand, there are dozens of cities that have banned new gas connections entirely, despite legal challenges, with others charging fees for carbon emissions, like Burlington's carbon pollution impact fee, Cambridge's net zero compliance fee, and New York City's local law 97. I don't view these as penalizing developers or even as disincentives for gas, but rather proper cost allocation. Right now, the costs of burning fossil gas are externalized, with the atmosphere serving as an open sewer for emissions. Here, we're mostly insulated from those costs. They're being paid by poor people in the global south. Massive flooding in Pakistan and Libya, drought in Sudan and Guatemala, wildfires in Brazil, extreme heat in the Philippines. Our emissions are doing this, and people are suffering and dying right now because of us. As a rich country and city that have long benefited from fossil fuels, we must eliminate them as soon as possible. New construction is just the start, one that's been put off for way too long. It's the easy part. Let's get it done now so we can get to the hard stuff.
Thank you. No further callers.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ken. A nice preamble to our discussion tonight. All right, so we're going to move into our next agenda item, which is discussing the memo resolution directing city administrator to identify incentives that would support voluntary efforts, I guess, by developers to increase emissions reductions. And I was hoping before we kick this off, I know some folks are teed up to kind of present some slides and share the material that was posted, but I thought someone here might want to provide a small recap of what the context of the memo is. I know it came out in January of this year, and I think all of us were on the commission at the time, but maybe for someone who hasn't been following us closely, I thought maybe Commissioner Mirsky or maybe Councilmember Briggs might want to share a little bit of the context. Sorry to cold call on you.
And sorry, I don't have it up in front of me, so
Okay.
I might need to pull it up and then.
All right. Maybe Vice Chair Harp, have you done a little thinking on this over the last month or so and could provide some context on where we start?
Sure. Yeah, and to provide some context based on where I understand it, I think as the memo reports. There was a resolution in June of 2023 asking the staff to identify incentives that would support voluntary efforts by residents and businesses to increase emission reductions through sustaining heating and cleaning, as well as beneficial electrification. And then also a written report around internal processes around those efforts. And so I think our understanding of this memo was in response to that. So this may be partial, my understanding in reading of this is that it's a partial response to that resolution from City Council and a step forward in that. And I think what I can share is we put together a sort of working group both to respond to that, the question around incentives around electrification in buildings, but also looking at disincentives and also requirements. And I can go into that a little bit more. But we're also, I think the working group was charged with also potentially trying to sort of navigate the real and perceived trade-offs between affordability and potential electrification as well. And I think that's something that the working group hasn't necessarily been able to fully get a handle on, because that requires a sort of larger set of economic potentially analyses as well. And so, but I think what we tried to do was provide an additional layer of framework to help make sense of the memo sort of broadly in terms of the different categories that it was looking at. Whether that was incentives, disincentives, potential requirements, and things, and try to parse out sort of things that the city might be able to do, the things that it might not be able to do, and sort of ways in which we might be able to think about some of these things in terms of policy that might create productive discussions around sort of the ways either in which we frame them or how we think about amounts and quantities and things like that. And so I think that's the sort of part of partially a preamble for this memo and our understanding the memo. And I think the task of, as I understand it, the task of the Energy Commission now is to sort of perhaps develop some sense of guidance or set of responses and reactions around the memo, and perhaps a framework for adding to that as guidance for City Council to help support their decision making moving forward around whether it's these incentives or whether it's sort of modifications or adjustments to those incentives. That's my sense of the context of this memo, and others may have some as well. And I can share a little bit about what the working group put together along with Mike, Commissioner Berkowitz here in a few minutes as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. Looks like Commissioner Murski has some thoughts.
Yeah, I wanted to just briefly put this in broader context, and that is in the context of the 820 plan. The 820 plan in Strategy 3, Action 2, which is called Update Building Codes, has an assumption that after 2022, all new buildings in Ann Arbor will be built so that they are essentially net zero ready. There's also an assumption in there that assumes that roughly 250 new housing units will be added per year. And so in both regards, the city has not met those targets in the 820 plan. So I think it's important first to understand why we're even talking about this is because it's in the plan. And then as Mr. Garber indicated, we have been building a lot of new housing, including hotels in Ann Arbor, and many of those units have not been electrified. They're not all electric. And as he indicated, they will likely then be consuming natural gas and emitting emissions for 20 plus years. So I think that's important to state. I have one other concern as we go into this topic, and that is that we had additions into building or to the meeting materials that were just sent out this afternoon. Those were rather extensive documents, multiple pages. I looked at them, but I did not have a chance to study them. It's my understanding that there is a city requirement that all materials at least be targeted to for distribution at least 48 hours in advance so people can review those and study those. I don't know if we're going to draw any conclusions tonight. I would feel uncomfortable doing so simply because I haven't had a chance to review those. We will have a chance apparently to talk about some of them, but I'm concerned that we're going to be making a policy recommendation where we really haven't had a chance to study this adequately. So I just wanted to raise those 2 points at the beginning of this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Murski. A couple of comments. I wanted to follow up on the first point about the A20 plan of having goal of having all new construction be electric ready by 2022. Was that missed because the code didn't get updated as we thought it might through the state?
The state code has not been updated.
Right.
Obviously, there are things that the city can do. So it's not just a state matter, it's something that the city can do. And that's what we're talking about tonight, or what kind of incentives or what kind of regulations the city might be able to adopt. And Mr. Garber also indicated, and we've covered some of these in past meeting minutes with resolutions and reports from both Cambridge and Burlington. So it's not just a matter of the state building code, it's just a matter of, there's an assumption in the plan. The plan assumes that there will be no new buildings added that are burning natural gas, and over the next several years those will be coming online, and that means that in order to get to net zero, we're either going to need more offsets or we're going to need to have something that is let's say over and above what's in the plan in order to achieve that goal.
Sure. Okay. And yeah, your point is well taken that there's a lot of pretty extensive material. I agree. It's quite detailed, and we're gonna see it. I think as a primer tonight. That's the plan, and Vice Chair Harper is going to walk us through the documents. And the goal would be not tonight, but perhaps at a future meeting, maybe even next month, to develop either a comment on the memo or a resolution to provide guidance to the council members. So I think this is the first kind of, in a way, it's definitely not the first time that we've viewed the memo together, but it's a bit of a first pass in terms of bringing to bear all of the additional work that has been done. Joe.
Yeah, only thing. Yeah, I just wanted to check in terms of the material you said you didn't get. Was that the which ones were those? Because I shared the updated agenda on Friday, but if anything didn't come through, let me know and I can make sure that is fixed in the future.
I think there was an email that you sent out this afternoon with a report from the subgroup that was apparently dated something like April 17th. This is by memory. And then there's several slides that also went out for the first time, as far as I know, this afternoon.
Yeah, I didn't send anything this afternoon. I shared on Friday. If I apologize if something weird happened with emails.
Okay.
Technology.
Okay, thanks.
No. Sorry about that, though. Either way.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Joe. And that being said, I think we'll still look at this for the first time. There's quite a lot to get through. So, Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. And just thanks to Commissioner Hart for providing that background. One other piece in terms of additional information that's going to be coming to council, economic, in addition to the memo, there's the economic development report that we've received that had recommendations, and council has passed a series of resolutions, one of them targeted at sustainability, asking for additional information to come back to us as well. And so that's, there will be some additional kind of, staff provided recommendations at a future point as well. And so, integrating all of this together and thinking about those in relationship to what we've already asked for, what we haven't asked for, and then in the future, kind of what's coming back to council. It's a great time to be getting feedback from Energy Commission.
All right, great. So do we want to launch into a little more detail on the materials? Commissioner Bergowitz or Vice Chair Harp?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll just say that I think part of the reason that as a working group that we wanted to sort of take this on is because it's it's a fairly complicated set of topics, and there's a lot of information and a lot of different pieces to it. So I think we wanted to try to unpack some of it and try to provide a framework for thinking about some of these things as a way of helping all of us think through some of what these things might be and provide a little bit of a common language for doing that. And potentially because we might not have everything right, and because we might want to pull in other sources of information as well. So I think we'll be relying on all of you to help us sort of navigate this as well. And this is just sort of a way for us to talk through. So let me see what I can do to pull these up. 1 second. Sorry. I'll just share these.
While Vice Chair Harp is pulling up the slides, I can maybe just flag process-wise a little bit. So background and kind of how we came up with some of these things. My goal in research was essentially just like watching lots of webinars, reading lots of articles. The Wolf Pack provided a whole slew of resources around potential incentives and solutions. And so kind of went through all those things, parse things out, try to just collect as many ideas as we could of, as Vice Chair Hart mentioned, like incentives, requirements, and disincentives that are out there, the popular ones and things that are tested or that we see elsewhere, and then kind of mapping those out as a menu and in for cross comparison with the city administrator's memo. We got some feedback from working group members at an in-person hearing on a bunch of these things, and so that's kind of what I think informs beautiful and organized slides that Gabe is reading us through right now.
Yeah, so I think what we tried to do is walk through the different things we wanted to parse out as many of you have heard in the past. Some of these conversations have hinged on the question of whether it's new construction, whether it's existing construction. Are we talking about incentives? Are we talking about requirements? Or are we talking about disincentives? And to try to clarify the things that the city can do through its activities, whether those are in those other buckets or others that might need other broader, whether it's state or even federal in the case may be. So the slides have some of the reference links, some of the things that have been shared with you all as well previously, but we also noticed in a number of the resolutions that were put forward previously, whether it was around say a carbon tax or even around some of the city administrators' language. A lot of the work was around whether the sort of definitions or framing of the incentives or the requirements. For example, a new project definition, for example, the sort of boundaries of where things were, the different amounts, percentages, intensities, and timings. And, we can talk, this is sort of a framework for us to sort of talk through some of these things. And so these might be areas for sort of flexibility or creativity in terms of thinking through how things might be structured. And we wanted to give ourselves enough of a way to think about this that this might become, there might be ways that we can think creatively about how this might be implemented or how it might be framed as well. So that was kind of how we approached it. And I'll just go through these very quickly since you have all the slides with you, and then perhaps we can sort of talk through, I think, maybe the main things one by one. But basically, these were some of the city administrator recommended incentives, such as the new project definitions or classifications. And we pulled out, I pulled out the 30% height bonus. So, some might ask, why 30%? Why not 20%? Why not 50%? These are some of the questions that, folks might have. Where, in terms of site plan approval, in terms of exemption from citizen participation requirements, some questions might be about like, well, to what degree, to what level of those requirements, for example? Is it all the requirements? Is it partial part of the requirements? And so I think these are some of the kinds of questions that we might be able to ask also to sort of refine our understanding of what sort of really achieves the outcomes that we're looking at. One of the ones that did receive a lot of feedback, and you'll see this in some of the notes from the working group session as well, which I won't necessarily directly refer to, is there was a lot of discussion, and I'd say broad level of sort of support and comment on the value of the early project planning. And in part because this sort of helps bring together a lot of different actors and hash out these questions and perhaps find solutions. And so that seemed to be something that was super valuable. In addition, I'll just list, these were some of the ones that were not necessarily recommended as incentives by the city administrator, but again, in sort of category of incentives. And I don't believe this last one, the sort of financing based on future increased tax revenue, this is something I think that we could provide some more references for as well, but this is something that's come up in a number of different conversations too. Again, there were incentives for building performance, so performance standards for building energy use, and again, this was something also that there in our conversations there was a lot tied to the sort of the dashboard and the benchmarking ordinance, and the sort of value of the implementation of that ordinance for then helping to provide and actually perhaps implement some of these incentives or requirements or disincentives, as the case may be. And so this may come up later in the discussion as well, but the notion that that benchmarking ordinance and the city administrative memo seem to be sort of fairly tied together in this conversation, and that may be something that we want to revisit further as well. Any questions currently about that? I'll just go through and mention that there were other things that perhaps had to be pursued via the state, whether they were legislative or regulatory. And we've, I think Claire had mentioned the updated building code and energy code that the state is currently working through at the moment. But as I understand it, that does not, for example, include the net zero appendix as we understand it, for example. So those are things that we might want to look at as well. Setting aside funds such as refunds or other grants to offset taxes is so desired, but these obviously have implications that sort of go beyond the city as well. Previously, the Energy Commission had visited, had taken up a resolution looking at that had, among other things, a carbon pollution impact fee. We wanted to include that in here as well as a good example of perhaps a disincentive, but also to pay attention to in what ways what are the sort of assumptions of that? How is the fee? What's the range of the fee? In what kinds of units? These are things that we might want to look at as we sort of structure and think about the disincentives as well, and try to. And I would say, sort of in my point of view, try to put them in units that will make intuitive sense to folks as we're sort of reading this. So, for example, how does that fee sort of relate to energy use in practice? Perhaps it also related to the BTUs as well, but how does it relate to what people might intuitively understand in how they're using energy in their buildings, in their offices, in their homes on a weekly or a monthly basis? These are things that we might want to try to translate if we were developing, I think, language as well. Another natural gas connection fee was also mentioned. As something that the city might be able to do as a disincentive. And there were some comments about this as well. And then also things that were sort of a combination. So requirements, again, we mentioned the building and energy code as well. and things like that. And let's see. I'd mentioned the building performance and emission standards. And again, this is sort of builds on the existing benchmarking ordinance. And it's something that would probably be a combination of, not only requirements, but also incentives and disincentives, as the case may be. And so that might be something that's looked at sort of more holistically, also in terms of how that's communicated, how folks are being brought into that. So as a quick high level overview of sort of how we tried to sort of take the city administrators memo, but also add to that some of the things that we've seen. And we're also looking, I think, nationally for other examples around the country, and also looking here home for examples that others might have and that might fit in this. And so this might work for us as a framework to start thinking through some of these areas and start piecing together what we think might make an appropriate set of, for example, recommendations or directions or ways to think about that. And I'll leave it there for now. And I think, Mike, did you want to add anything? Commissioner Berkowitz, did you want to add anything else to that? I think we have a number of other sort of comments with, specifically related to each of the different sort of incentives and things like that. And we can sort of add those as well based on sort of talking through them as a working group, but I'm sure all of them do as well. So I don't want to take up too much time.
Yeah, that was really it. I was just thinking once we get to kind of each individual item that we were talking through there, I'd be happy to help give an overview of some of the comments or feedback we got from working group members. Also, can you all hear me clearly? I switched over to my headphones since I first. Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone have questions or comments that have arisen? Yes, Commissioner Coleman Garcia.
Just a really small question about the heating, the building heating, and I noticed that the heating of water was not included in your suggestions. That was all. My only question. Why not?
I don't know that it was purposely excluded. I want to say that it's kind of wrapped into the broader just nomenclature of electrification, but yeah, I do think that is included as a component, just kind of any appliances or heating. I'm not sure it was, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess I didn't think it was just heating, but kind of all gas use in buildings essentially. Or if that's not what the city administrator or other proposals were focused on, that's at least I think what we had in mind, and what we know to be the mission of or the goal of, I think, this movement.
Yeah, I'm reading in the memo that basically minimization of the natural gas connection itself. So trying to completely eliminate a gas meter and any infrastructure that might be tied in from the gas distribution system. I think that's the goal.
And it wasn't in the city administrator's memo specifically, but some of the things that we talked about kind of building off the benchmarking ordinance and program. The benchmarking, I believe, is for energy and for water as well. So there's some aspects there that might make sense. That's around, I think, water usage, not water heating or anything of that nature, but still just flagging they're interconnected.
Great. Any other comments? It sounded like you guys wanted to maybe, Commissioner Berkowitz, did you want to share a little bit more? I have some comments. I don't know what would be best to kick off a discussion.
Yeah, if you or others maybe have comments, I'd say go for it, and then I can kind of fill in if people aren't saying some of the things that folks on the work group said.
Cool. Yeah. So let's see how to formulate. As I read through the recommendations in the memo and those that were just laid out for us, seems like one of the biggest benefits we have is the benchmarking ordinance. And for me, this transition is going to take building up transitional infrastructure, definitely based in data, and kind of what I see is like maybe a progressive plan towards something that maybe looks like local law 97 in New York, where just to kind of reiterate what's been said already, to actually charge a fee for additional emissions that have not been mitigated through retrofits. That's, for New York, really targeted at building efficiency, maybe more so than actual, natural gas elimination or, electrification transition. So, but I think that's also an important goal for us, and I don't want to lose sight of building efficiency at the same time. Although what we're talking about here does seem to be focused on new construction development. So I want to make sure that we kind of parse those. So I guess, I wanted to share that I hear the benchmarking ordinance come up again and again. I do think it's a really important kind of like keystone of the Ann Arbor program and towards decarbonization. And I think that the next step should be, so it should hinge off of that progress, if possible. And I'm really in support of the early planning, to support myself. I know it was recommended in the memo, but, having worked in new construction development and having been on the engineering side of the kinds of requests like, can these buildings be all electric? And, how do we push the envelope on energy efficiency and decarbonization? That kind of support from the city is really important. I know that I've heard from developers in our city that some of the biggest gaps to actually achieving all electric buildings, even if developers do have the gumption or the drive to make that happen, is that, let's say, the utility, the electrical capacity isn't there, or the fees are extremely large. And I'm hearing complaints about DTE kind of pushing back on the capacity that can be added for a fully electric building, especially for residential. That tends to be a problem. And so I see that the major challenges are not just sort of like us against them in terms of developers, but more so just the status quo of this construction development process itself, and trying to kind of break down where the barriers really are, rather than thinking that we could just incentivize it and then it would happen. I think that it's not going to be as simple as that. Maybe we already know that based on what we've done so far. So that's kind of the summary of my comments. And so I just wanted to make those known. Mike, was there anything else that you had?
Well, I'd say if I think all those are really on point, and we saw those things reflected in both the feedback from folks in the working group and just the research we did behind the scenes. You mentioned the benchmarking and building off of that and kind of the New York policy. As I was doing the research, I saw that kind of emissions-based standards or like greenhouse gas standards for buildings that are kind of either built off those benchmarking or standalone. Either way, they're kind of the most popular and well-tested models for cities across the country trying to decarbonize, whether it's electrification or just greenhouse gas reduction in general, including the efficiency and other things you talked about. It is legally an option in Michigan. It avoids the full ban like preemption issue that was seen in Berkeley. And there are many cities either doing it already or in the process of adopting it. I know the city of Chicago is weighing a proposal on this right now to adopt an emissions-based standard for, I think it's medium and large buildings. The city of Detroit just adopted a benchmarking ordinance last fall, so they're going to start actually measuring it. They're a few years behind where Ann Arbor is, but in the future they could do something there. But New York, many other cities are doing emissions-based standards for medium and large buildings. So I do think that's separate from what the city administrator reviewed and suggested, but I do think that's like the thing that popped up most, that the leading experts recommend as probably the best way to do this. Again, it's for existing and potentially new buildings, and it'd mostly be medium and large buildings, though. I don't think we're talking residential for that. And then you mentioned the early planning with the utility. Work group members seem to very much support that as well. Thought it just makes a lot of sense. It can mitigate some of the issues that you had flagged. I believe there's a development, going through right now that wants to be all electric, and DTE said maybe the grid or the infrastructure locally can't handle it, but some pre-planning might be able to massage that over and find solutions ahead of time. So your thoughts, Chairman McKenna, I think were very well reflected in both the research and the work group support for those things.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to just add one more item on there. So hearing about your comments on how more advanced cities in this realm are, taking advantage of the benchmark ordinances and some databases that they may be building. I just want to make sure that to highlight the split incentive that we may create. So if we have, we're concerned with new development and we work with a benchmarking ordinance to kind of, ratchet down emissions by, let's say, increasing a cost per emission over time, that there might be a gap where new buildings could get in, let's say, gas or, kind of high energy users, and then kind of pass along those costs to future owners or, depending on the type of development. So that would be something that would concern me, where the kind of economic pressure isn't really on the actor at the beginning. So we may need some kind of other leverage or other mechanism that kind of is an add-on. So I don't know, Commissioner Berkowitz, did you see anything that kind of reflected this new construction concern in the cities that are advanced in their benchmarking?
Not a ton, but I do think that's very valid concern and legitimate. So, duly noted, but I didn't see a lot of folks running into that just yet. I think most folks are essentially, once they get the buildings willing to measure their, energy and water usage, then just having some sort of requirements there was just the next step. And others might know of cities that are further along, but I can't speak to any that I ran into where they were directly experiencing what you said. But I do think, projecting that could happen, it's something that could be taken advantage of. There would need to be some, preclusion or smart language set up around that, or maybe phasing or something. So yes.
Yeah, Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. As we're wrestling with this, I think it's important to know that, it's probably obvious the things that we're wrestling with. It's certainly around affordability. It's certainly around creating policies that don't also continue to support housing growth, because that is another really significant challenge that we're having in our community, is to make sure we are we don't put policies in place that sort of stagnate that growth. So I thought it might be useful for me to share also, just so everybody here can see it, the latest direction that we've provided to requesting information back from planning staff and consultants and city administration as well, just around definition construction. And also we're trying to take this sort of dual strategy of, creating, trying to find ways to essentially reduce the cost of developing for new development, reducing the costs of developing the way that we want to, and streamlining the processes, just pulling out any of the costs that we possibly can potentially, so that folks, we can encourage folks to build the right way, properly, even for projects that. Because as we know, we cannot require this for most of our development. So let me see if I can properly share this screen. Okay, is everybody seeing my screen?
Looks good.
Great, thank you. So sorry, I searched for economic development, so everything, or development or something. So that's why everything's highlighted. That's that. But so basically, this is in early April that we passed this resolution, kind of based on the economic development report and the incentives memo, asking for basically creating and defining creating these definitions. What does fully electrified development actually mean in the UDC? We also had what does an energy efficient development look like in the UDC? Creating a fast track approval process. Let's see, amending code to designate, basically allowing for stuff. This is something that's actually done pretty typically in across the state, that things can be approved by planning staff as opposed to going through planning commission. Once we can pull out steps in the process for by right approval, that allowing that sort of fast tracking for sustainable developments that meet these definitions. Trying to, considering what, modifying the site plan review or related fees would look like if we waived it for these types of developments. And then, pushing forward our city's legislative policy agenda. We're asking for this to be that these changes come back to us, it's a year and a half from now. Obviously, we'd love to see it coming sooner. And that, so these are, some of the pieces that we already have in process, that obviously nothing has been approved or anything like that. And so as Energy Commission is kind of thinking about these pieces, and also thinking about what really that type of definition should, what do you want to see come back to us around that definition of fully electrified or energy efficient? Because the devil's really in the details there. So let's see. Okay. I just wanted to make sure everybody got a chance to, and I can, share that out with others later, so everybody has access to that language. But I'd love to certainly hear some feedback around that as well, or what elements we're not exploring.
Yeah, go ahead, Vice Chair Harp.
Partially is I think a way of bridging that question of the definitions, like fully electrified, for example. One of the things that I think was present in looking at some of the incentives and disincentives and whatnot was this question of all or less, right? And so I'm curious from the perspective of the other commission members of sort of how you sort of might tackle that, and I'll try to give some examples. I think in the city administrator's memo, there was a mention of an exception for cooking gas, right? For restaurants and things like that. It's easy enough to imagine, I think, situations even in restaurants where not everything needs to be heated with natural gas, right? Or needs to be cooked with natural gas. Like there are certainly lots of boiling water is a great thing not to do with natural gas, for example, because there's, other efficient ways of doing that. And I think the same thing is true probably for a lot of other situations. And, I know that, even for example, like some heat pumps, when combined with natural gas existing furnaces, can be more efficient than they would otherwise be, because they're using the existing heat. So, I think there's lots of different cases where we can sort of imagine situations of moving. And I think this comes up for natural gas connections also. So the question is, there's lots of exemptions for sort of emergency heat and things like that. So I'm wondering sort of about that question of more or less in a lot of these, and sort of how other commissioners are thinking about that. And one way this plays out, in one conversation, someone had mentioned me the question of natural gas connections versus combustion of natural gas on sites, and the difference being sort of if you reduce or eliminate combustion of natural gas for, say, cooking or heating or things like that, it opens up, there may be opportunities, whether it's for fuel cells or other kinds of activities. So, I know there's lots of exceptions, and I'm trying to sort of think through some of the cases in which we might want to sort of think carefully about that sort of more or less question, I guess. So I'll put that out there to all of you as an ongoing way of framing this.
All right. Any more thoughts and comments? Anybody see anything missing or? Yeah, Commissioner Murski.
I have just a number of questions and comments. First of all, who were the members of the subgroup? Was it Gabe and Mike, or were there any other members of the subgroup, and who were they?
Yeah, it was me and Gabe.
Okay.
And then for our working group session, we opened it up to the public and took feedback, but Gabe and I were the ones.
Right. Okay. Another question that I have is, Councilmember Briggs already mentioned a resolution that was passed by council earlier this year. And I'm wondering, it's the name of the resolution is resolution to direct the city administrator to implement new processes and programs to support sustainability in the built environment. I see that Councilmember Briggs was one of the sponsors. I'm wondering what elements of the city administrator's recommendations are already covered by that resolution that was passed, if any.
Yeah, a fair amount of them are included within that, but certainly in terms of how that plays out, we are lacking. Part of what this resolution is requesting is more detailed information on these sets of recommendations that were laid out within the incentives memo. Kind of, for example, the waiving of certain types of fees. What does that look like? How far? These are. We need more information before we can really implement that type of change.
What I'm getting at, if I may, is the commission is being asked to comment on this set of recommendations from the city administrator. If council has already acted on some of them, is it a new point for the Energy Commission, at least in some regards, to those specific recommendations that have already been addressed by city council?
I don't think it's, I think it's just a continuing conversation. I just want to make sure that it's clear where we're at in the process. We've asked for additional feedback. If something that council has asked for, Energy Commission really thinks is the wrong direction, it'd be nice to know that. So, I think there's none of these are implemented changes yet. However, I think you can probably see in terms of what we've asked for and the research that's being done. Okay, great. This has already been asked for in terms of certain elements, but I think the conversation, around what should that fully electrified definition look like, having had that, doing some of that work right now, and passing that, that can inform the process and the definition that is being created, right? So that's helpful to have had that conversation and that input directing into this process, and it's more timely even because we've already said do this, and it's helpful to know where our commission, Energy Commission, is landing on this, and also you can start seeing, okay, what was within the framework of the incentives memo and the economic development report, and what we've asked for, and what haven't we asked for yet? What aren't we exploring? What should we be exploring? Where are those gaps? Where do we have some opportunity? Because obviously, this, so I don't think it's a moot point.
Okay. And I have just two more questions. First is, I submitted to Joe a list of 11 questions. Those were forwarded to the commission. I sent him those sometime around, I don't know, the 20th or something like that of last month. And I saw that those were forwarded to the commission sometime in the middle of last week. I'm wondering if the subgroup had a chance to review those, and if those were taken into consideration in the slides that they developed. And I guess related to that, I would still like to know the answers to most, if not all of those questions, including just a few things like what other cities, and might address this, but the report that, or the recommendations that the city administrator passed on, what other cities were benchmarked. There's no background memo to this. It just is a list of recommendations. So what, these are questions that every city worldwide is dealing with. How do we get to full electric buildings, and how do we eliminate emissions? So this is not something that the city of Ann Arbor should be creating its own wheel. We should be benchmarking all the other wheels that are out there. That's one question that for me is unanswered. Another question, just simply looking at a point in time where hopefully this isn't necessary anymore. We don't need to provide any incentives. And so the question is, how would these incentives be essentially rolled back or eliminated one by one? I don't see. In fact, you might remember most commissioners were on the commission back in 2022 when Tim McDonald from Onion Flats presented a presentation on all electric passive house buildings. And last year, in communication with me, he wrote me that all of the developers that he knows in the East Coast are building all electric simply because it's less expensive. And there's obviously a different paradigm here in the Midwest. But if that indeed that's true in the Northeast, what is informing those developers? I'm sure Tim doesn't know every developer, and he's just like all of us. He has his own people that he associates with. But if indeed that's true, are these incentives even necessary, or is there simply just a requirement that we do some better education, or I don't know what it might be. So there's a whole, like I said, there's 11 questions that I posed, and I'm really interested in knowing the answers to those questions. And then one last question that I have, just a week or two ago, the city approved a new 17-story housing development on Church Street. And at least the coverage in MLive didn't indicate whether that was going to be an all-electric building or not. And I'm just wondering if indeed we continue to approve very, very large natural gas connected buildings. I was wondering if anybody could shed light on that. Because I think that just illustrates the problem in the sense that we're dealing with these issues. And as we just saw in the document from Councilmember Briggs, some of these things won't be addressed until the end of 2025. And so, month by month, potentially, we're continuing to approve new projects that are natural gas connected. So I'll leave it at that and hope for a few responses to those comments.
Yeah, Commissioner Berkowitz.
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner Mirsky, for your questions. I took a look at them via email, and a handful of them I know were reflected in the comments that our group members and members of the public shared with us. So I don't think all of them are perfectly addressed, but there are a handful of them then in there. And I think I'd be happy to kind of review those maybe out loud for folks in more detail here, but some of the things you shared very much were reflected in the feedback we got. I just went back and pulled up my notes from research. So just looking at other states and kind of what they're doing, states that have either building performance standards or building emission standards, which was the top recommendation, and again is a requirement, not an incentive or disincentive, but kind of the best pointed to one. So Boston, they have a building performance standard. Seattle has a building performance standard. Ithaca in New York has a building performance standard and is regarded as the gold standard. It's the best one. All the research and the speakers I listened to on webinars kept referring back to Ithaca as being kind of one of the best models. Washington, D.C. Has a building energy performance standard. St. Louis, Missouri has one, and I think was highly thought of as well. Washington State was exploring one more broadly.
So my question is not so much what did you review, but the question is what did staff review and what informed the city administrator's recommendations? That's what I would like to understand. And if there were all of this whole set of different kinds of actions that are being taken by different cities, what was the funnel process, if you will, that looked at what are all these other cities doing? What are in those cities being done that simply can't be done in Michigan because state law is different? And what comes out, the funnel at the bottom in terms of what Ann Arbor could or could not do or is not willing to do because, for example, it's not an incentive, but it's a regulation or a disincentive, whereas the memo or the resolution that was passed asking for the city administrator's recommendations only mentions incentives. It doesn't mention anything about disincentives or penalties, if you will, no sticks, if you will.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. And I'll just say the places I was naming, those were all building performance standards or building emission standards. Those are requirements. Those are not what the city administrator, I think, was asked to look into, but which is what the research said is the best, mechanism for actually getting results on this. So I can't speak to the city administrator's thinking or what, they did or did not consult in their research process and whatnot. So apologies there, but yeah, someone else maybe can fill in some more.
Yeah, Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, so I think it's a good question in terms of what sources were consulted. I'm not sure what the full list is. I'm sure we can probably get some more information on that. It is guided by what is legal in the state of Michigan versus what tools do we have, and that's why we are focusing in on incentives. That is the challenge of existing in Michigan right now. Specifically to the Church Street project. So please remember that is a planned unit development PUD project. And so we have the opportunity to do this. This is why this is included. It is basically they define it as primarily electric in that as the building will be automatic. There's an exception for a backup generator to create redundancy in it, but otherwise it's electric. There is integrated solar power, passive house technology. It's going to be built to LEED Gold standards, and it has 20% electric vehicle charging on site. So that's kind of a summary of the key components that are within that related to sustainability.
That's great.
All right. I believe it is time to bring this discussion to a close. I think that we had a nice exploration. Are there any final comments here before we take a quick break and move into commission business for tonight? Anything anyone want to share about maybe next steps? I know this will be on the agenda next month to kind of wrap it up and actually provide some of those comments or guidance to council members, but any other comments here?
I'll just flag for folks who haven't had a chance to thoroughly read through them yet, just maybe before the next time we review this, check out the document. It's 5 pages long, but feedback that we got from work group members on the various different components, see if any of that stuff resonates with you. I think a lot of it was said tonight. There were some things that didn't. And so City Council Member Briggs in particular, as you guys are looking at that resolution, see if there's anything in there that might be helpful. I think folks asked questions about a lot of the stuff that was already brought up, but this might be helpful in the thinking there as well.
Great. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll come back at 7:11. Thanks. All right, come on back, come on back. All right, so we are gonna transition to tonight's commission business, which I know it's the highly anticipated officer elections. So Joe, I will ask that you just kindly explain the process so that folks kind of know what to expect. And then I can move us through it.
Yeah. So kind of similar to all other processes, we'll just kind of do the general, have someone nominate, someone second for each position. Anyone you can self-nominate. If you are nominated, you can self-second, if that's a term, but those are all possible. So, we'll go through, we'll do chair first, then vice chair second. In the event, if only one person is nominated and accepts, we will vote on that person to be elected, simple majority. If multiple people are nominated and accepted, we'll vote one at a time, and whoever has more votes will move forward. And we will work from there.
Okay, so take a motion to open the nominations or just ask for nominations and seconds?
We can just start with nominations and seconds.
Great. Nominations for chair. Does anyone have any?
Self-nominations are fine.
Self-nominations, highly anticipated. Vice Chair Harp, are you self-nominating?
I think Commissioner Colvin Garcia had her hand up first.
Oh.
No?
Commissioner Colvin Garcia, are you self-nominating?
I would like to nominate Commissioner Harp for the role as chair for the Energy Commission.
All right. Do you have any seconds? Councilmember Briggs. All right. Any other nominations? Commissioner Colvin Garcia.
I'm surprised no one else is raising their hand. And I would like to nominate Commissioner Berkowitz as vice chair.
All right, Commissioner Berkowitz. I would like to second that nomination. Is that allowed? All right. For vice chair. Okay. Well, currently we have one nomination for chair and one for vice chair. Are there any additional nominations for either position?
And just to make sure, do both of you accept those nominations just so we're aware if we need to keep going?
Yes, I accept the nomination. Thank you.
Can I, and +1 support Vice Chair Harp become chair, but I think I would like to decline and see if anybody else is willing to be vice chair.
That's why we don't ask if they accept.
Joe.
It's only fair. We could force, but
Not under Joe's watch. Well, Commissioner Berkowitz, once you were kind of out there dangling on the branch, it's too tasty of a fruit. I mean, we have a pretty small team tonight too, so
the only thing I'll note is we have not heard from anyone else, or there's been no other interest from those who are not here in being vice chair. So there's no lingering someone out there interested who is
okay.
Not here.
All right. Well, why don't we vote on chair? Give Commissioner Berkowitz a little more time to contemplate his life. All right. So, do I have a motion to open the vote tonight for chair?
So moved.
A second. Okay, Commissioner Berkowitz. And I'll second that. And all right, so voting for current Vice Chair Harp as Chair of the Ann Arbor Energy Commission. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, that's a unanimous vote in the affirmative. So Vice Chair Harp will become the chair. Thank you so much for your service, Vice Chair Harp. Yes, Councilmember Briggs.
I was wondering if former Vice Chair Harp might be willing to talk up the excitement of what it was like being Vice Chair, and maybe was it the level of responsibility associated with it in terms of time commitment and things like that that might sway others around the screen.
Yeah, I'll share for I mean, it's been a great last year. I would say it's been relatively straightforward working with Joe and Chair McKenna. Basically meeting once a month for about I don't know what it was, about a half hour, and working on sort of formulating the agenda. And I think what was great about it was also being able to think about how we sort of think proactively across the year about the kinds of issues that we would raise. And it was being vice chair was sort of fairly straightforward, being able to sort of chip in and help think about what other things collectively we might want to take on in terms of the agenda. So it was really useful, I think, also just to sort of see sort of the background of how things came together oftentimes, and that I think insight helped sort of understand what was happening in commission meetings, but also perhaps a little bit more about what was happening with council members and also with staff in terms of the work that they were doing. And so I would encourage anybody who's interested to take on the role of vice chair. And I'm really, I'm looking forward also, I think, to the year ahead, because I think we have a lot of issues that we're trying to work through and we're trying to suss through. And I think helping to put together, I think, some ways for us to help proactively think about those issues is something that I'm really excited about, but also how we communicate and frame that in ways that are helpful for city council members and also members of the public in ways to help them sort of ask better questions and work through this. So those are the kinds of things that I'm really excited about that I think we're going to work through and try to get some of these questions that we thought through back in December. Also, we've been sort of working through these on the agenda, and I think we'll probably want to revisit sort of where we're at with some of those and also try to, maintain the really high priority things that we want to move through and support, because I think there's a big couple of years ahead with all that's sort of happening and converging.
Yeah, and I'll just add on and say that I think monthly developing the agenda in a 30-minute meeting is actually quite straightforward, and maybe more so than one would think, because we have quite a backlog of discussion topics and dense and timely discussion topics. And then I also always take, this will be current Vice Chair Harp's responsibility going forward, but suggestions for the next agenda. And I think there's kind of always this feedstock, as it were, of great topics. And then with Joe's help, Joe formulates the agenda for the official document. And I don't know, I think I've really enjoyed being a part of the process, and I think it will be an appropriate size lift. So I hope that helps.
Thanks. Commissioner Berkowitz, did that perhaps sway you from that decline to excitement?
Gosh, I wish I could. I really would like to, but I candidly just have lots of professional and personal obligations that are making it tough for me to find the time that I want to contribute as is. So not the right time for me. if absolutely nobody else is willing, I would consider it, but I really would prefer not to. I apologize, but I enjoy the role I'm in and helping with the work group and behind the scenes stuff and just being an active contributor.
No need at all to apologize. I totally understand. And, we can move forward and you folks can vote on vice chair next month when you have more attendees. Okay, so that concludes that piece. Yes, Commissioner Coleman Garcia, some thoughts.
I would like to thank you for your service over this year as chair.
Thanks.
It was a really very good year, and your experience and your leadership was very valuable, and I want to thank you so much because it takes a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yay. Commissioner Murski?
Yes, I'd like to second that. Your professional and academic background has really served us well. One other comment about officer elections. It's not officially an office. It's not listed in the bylaws, but we do have the liaison position to the Environmental Commission, and I serve in that role. I've done so, I don't know, maybe 5 out of the last 6 years. And I think either in this meeting or the next meeting, we should put that on the agenda to see if there's anyone else that's interested in serving in that role. I already informed Joe that I'm willing to continue in that role. And then we should make a decision on that and have a vote and then clarify that, even if it's not really an officer position.
Great. All right, any additional comments here before we close out? Okay, so we're going to move to reports from staff. So I'll look to Joe to share any OSI reports.
Yeah, got a couple things going on and upcoming. First, because this will happen before our next meeting, just want to note that A20 week is right around the corner. This is our annual event we have to celebrate when the A20 plan was adopted, everything that's happened in the past year and everything that's coming up going forward. There's activities going on throughout the week. This is June 9th through June 15th. There's, I think, at least like 3 or 4 events every single day in some way connected to it. So you can find out all the information on this at a2gov.org/A20, 0 spelled out ZERO week. Updates will be posted regularly. Also, if you are interested, there's also plenty of volunteer events. So that should all be on the website. But if not, feel free to contact me at any time. Also want to mention that the Ann Arbor Office of Sustainability and Innovations is working with Ann Arbor Spark and are happy to announce a new Ann Arbor Green Business Challenge that's designed to bring together local businesses and stakeholders all around advancing the sustainability of businesses here in Ann Arbor. And this challenge kicked off earlier this month. Additionally, this is something else that's kind of come up semi-frequently here on the commission, but is now formal. The Ann Arbor Home Energy Advisor officially went live last week. This is a free service. It's available to help residents obtain free home energy assessments, plan out their decarbonization projects, connect to contractors and rebates, and get a customized path to zero decarbonization plan for their home. The service is open to all homeowners and renters in Ann Arbor, and you can learn more at a20hea.org. And the last thing I'll share, because particular interest for this commission, the people who follow this commission, but the kind of in relation to that, this month's sustainability series will be hosted on May 29th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Either at the downtown Ann Arbor District Library branch or virtually. It'll be covering the Home Energy Advisor and some information on the upcoming rebates that will be discussed very shortly. So. And also, lastly, outside of just those specific updates, just want to again thank Chair McKenna, Commissioner Zittelman, and Commissioner Sendra, all for their service on this commission. Really appreciate having all of your insights. And even though we're sad to see you go, we're really looking forward to everything that you've got coming up for you and all your incredibly bright careers going forward.
Thanks, Joe. All right, we're going to move to our other reports. So I'll take the working group if there are any more comments, and then hear from Commissioner Marsky about the Environmental Commission, and then lastly we'll go to Councilmember Briggs. So first up, any additional updates from the working group? I know we talked a lot today. No. Great. Commissioner Marsky, comments from the Environmental Commission.
Environmental Commission's last meeting was dedicated to water contamination issues. In particular, discussions of the Gelman site and the dioxane pollution that's there. In particular, the EPA's proposal to add that site to its, what is it called, Superfund National Priorities List. And as far as I know, Councilmember Briggs, has that actually happened yet, or is that still pending some approvals?
I believe it's still pending an approval.
Yeah, that's what I understand too. Roger Rail, who's the chairman of CARB, he addressed the commission and gave an update on all that. So if anybody's interested in details on that, they can go to the presentations that are on Legistar.
Thank you so much. And we'll go to Councilmember Briggs for an update from the council.
Yeah, thanks. So you heard the update around the Church Street project that was approved at the last meeting. The big piece that council is currently working on is just the city's budget, which will be adopted at the next council meeting. Any potential amendments to the council budget are due by Wednesday by council members, must be submitted, and then will be, I think, posted by Friday, if I remember the timeline correctly. And we have our next meeting next Monday. So it's a biennial budget. So it's not quite the not as big shifts on the second year in of a budget. However, the creation of an economic development office is something the city's considering. And I spoke to some of the pieces around how sustainability is kind of interfacing with this conversation around economic development as well. So that's all I can think of for the moment.
Thanks. Okay, we're going to move now to our last opportunity for public comment. So as at the beginning of the meeting, this is an opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you're watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter the meeting ID 956-8718-7876. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one, using the last 3 digits of your phone number. To electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. And when speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any background sounds. And again, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Joe, do we have anyone on the line?
No callers at this time.
All right. Great. All right. Items for the next agenda. Thoughts on the June meeting? Sounds like we should continue discussing the administrator's memo and perhaps develop some guidelines for the council. Any other thoughts? Yes, Commissioner Marsky.
As far as agenda items, we have a long list that we generated. Yep. Hopefully we'll refer back to that, and maybe it would be appropriate to spend a few minutes to relook at that list and decide what priorities might be, especially with a new chair too. That might be an appropriate time to do so.
Nice. Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Berkowitz.
I just want to let folks know I already informed Joe, but I have to miss our June meeting for a personal obligation. That doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about incentives then. Please do so. I think you've got most of the resources you need from me and all that jazz. But just flagging, I can't join y'all next month, so I'll see you in July.
Okay.
So we're going to elect you in your absence.
Oh my God.
I wouldn't be able to say no if I'm not present, I guess.
Yes. We only vote by consent here. All right. Additional thoughts for agenda? Definitely revisit the list. I know we've already hit quite a few. All right. So we're gonna move to adjournment. It's currently 7:32 p.m. and as chair, I declare this meeting. I am Claire, and I also declare this meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciated your support of me. I'll see y'all around.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.